Over to you.
Well, we've got our PowerPoint to show as well.
Oh, okay. All right. Sorry, I don't want to see you. I've got to see your
So
smile
good
face
evening.
to start with. All right. Okay. We'll go straight to the PowerPoint then. Why isn't it there? There we go. Right. Go.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming to our Electrifying Bradfield monthly webinar, where we've been having a lot happening this year, and we have to because it's an emergency. I'd like to begin and pay my respects to the First People on the land wherever we meet, and here we are in where I'm meeting, and I pay my respects to the Darramaragal and the Darug people, and pay my respects to the elders past, present, and emerging. And we are here for our Electrifying Bradfield webinar, where we are working very hard to get our community to go electric with renewables. And of course we have to, because it is constantly a climate catastrophe that we are, and which the whole inland Australia is witnessing now, with rising floods that are constantly going through inland towns and causing really great harm, great agricultural loss, and great environmental damage. So we are really serious. And also we've just had our COP27, where we are really come together, the world has come together, and it's really very serious that we may not, well, we are going to go beyond 1.5 degrees, but that doesn't mean we have to stop. And also we have to consider the compensation of those people who are suffering the most with climate. So we're just going to show a little video now from the ABC News about our stark warning. Let's listen to this.
Oh, okay. Sorry, so this is where you want the Electrify black drill.
The stark, no, this is the stark warning one, the ABC one.
Yeah,
that one.
There isn't one there. You didn't.
Okay, all right, well, then we'll have to miss that one, and let's just go straight into it because Kristen's here and we've got our guest speaker, Kristen.
So it's not the Electrify, you don't want that one. I've got, right?
Yep, well, let's watch this. Yeah.
Is that one? Yeah, all right. Okay, so with that one we can see. Right, hang on a second.
Some people will remember it from last time, but the volume was very bad, but this time we have a better recording of it.
The race is on to create Australia's first electric suburb. Soon, households in the 2515 could have the opportunity to join a generously subsidised program. Why? Because the world is moving to clean energy. To speed up this transition, we want to show it working in a real community. The idea is to get about 500 households to go all electric in 6 ways. We need to electrify a car, we need to electrify your cooking, electrify the water heater, electrify the heating, and of course, use rooftop solar and a battery to make it all work out. If you'd like to join me and your other neighbours in this world's first pilot, please fill out the survey at the end of this message. Together, we can build Australia's and the world's first all-electric, zero-emission community.
So that was our little introduction to Kristen, who I'm going to now hand over to. And as I've said in our webinar, she's very passionate about climate justice, and she's working hard. So we'll see who's going to get there first. Will it be 2515 or will it be Bradfield? Let's hand it over to you now, Kristen, to give us your lovely talk.
Thanks, Janine, and challenge accepted. We actually would love a competition, so please make it be you guys and keep us honest. I'm just going to share my screen as well. Oh, sorry, just give me 1 sec. Sorry, it's because it's recording, I just have to quit and come back in for some reason. It's asking me to share my screen. So can you just give me 1 sec? Sorry about the delay.
I must admit, I find the whole the Zoom sharing thing is very touch and go. You're never quite sure what's going to happen. Oh, you made it, David. Very good. Very good.
Yeah, I've had a big day, mate.
Don't you always?
Sometimes I get some free time.
There we go.
Let's see if this works now. Okay. All right, you're with me now?
Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So thank you so much for having me here today. I'm from a group called Electrify 2515, and 2515 is our postcode, and we're based down in the Illawarra in beautiful Darrell country, and I'd like to pay my respects to the elders of our region as well. I don't know if any of you have been down there, so I live in Thurrool. Our kind of 2515 postcode covers about 6 small suburbs, so from Thurrool, Austinmere, Coaldale, Wombara, those sorts of suburbs. And we're a team. The Electrify 2515 are basically a group of volunteers. We're all local. We've all got kind of children and jobs, and we basically, like all you guys, it seems, we all share a collective concern for the climate crisis and had been looking for something practical to do to sort of address it, but within our own community. We feel like we've done a lot of things, signed petitions and attended rallies, and we wanted something that felt like we could actually address some of the climate despair that at least I've felt watching, increasing floods and all the other kind of natural impacts that we're seeing. So this is our group on the right. We look like country hillbillies there, but I think it was just a bad fashion day, so excuse the flannelette. So it was kind of when we came across the work of Dr. Saul Griffith that really kind of gave us a direction for our group of what we'd like to achieve. And we basically are keen to attempt to fulfill his vision of creating a net zero emissions community that's all electric. So for those of you who aren't aware of Saul, but I'm sure most of you are, he's a bit of a guru. He's an engineer and scientist and energy expert. He's got a couple of organisations, one in America, one in Australia. He's written 2 books. One that I recommend reading if you haven't already is called The Big Switch, and a lot of these kind of concepts are covered there and really step out like a practical blueprint for how we would achieve electrification and why. And he also co-wrote America's Inflation Reduction Act, which got passed recently. And that is the world's biggest piece of climate legislation that's ever happened in history. And essentially what Saul and others achieved with this bill was to get the government to agree to subsidising or somehow supplying households, every household in the US, access to up to $20,000 worth of incentives and rebates that would enable them to electrify their homes. So it's a pretty amazing kind of piece of legislation. And I guess just stepping back, the reason why Saul and us are kind of going on this path comes down to our emissions. And when we're looking at our greenhouse gas emissions in Australia, by far the biggest source of it is our energy use. So that's our electricity, but also our transport. So, and the biggest part of our transport is our cars on our roads. Another way to look at it is in Australia's emissions, about 40% of the emissions are accounted for what we export, so we don't really have control over these, but we do have control over 60% of our national emissions, and this is kind of the area that this project is looking at. And then one more of these pie charts. Within that domestic emissions framework, households are responsible for 42% of those domestic emissions, and commercial, which is things like local business, but also schools, surf clubs, those sorts of groups, are responsible for nearly 30%. So if you put those two figures together, that's about 70%, and that's what our communities are responsible for. So on the one hand, you know, some people might say, oh, what good can one household do? And, you know, there's all these big coal-fired power stations, for instance. But on the other hand, you look at it and say, we actually have a tangible way to address a good proportion of our national emissions. And it's something that gives power to individuals and communities to create that change. So it's change that we can kind of create in our own homes, but the real impact happens when we can roll it out across communities and then ideally roll it out across the country. So fundamental to these ideas is the fact that in Australia, we are very lucky because we have the world's cheapest form of energy here. So within the world, the cheapest form of energy you can find anywhere is rooftop solar, and the cheapest form of rooftop solar you can find anywhere is in Australia. So we are already quite a few years ahead of a lot of other countries because there was those kind of sort of government support systems that were put in place a number of years ago. In the US, solar is still a lot more expensive. And so actually they're ahead of us in terms of policy now, but we're the first country where households who would electrify would actually save thousands of dollars per household per year now. And so it kind of is quite exciting because it gives our country the opportunity to lead the world on practical climate action. And I guess just one, I find this chart interesting. This is, I should say that a lot of these charts are from Saul's work. But this chart here I find interesting. So this is the reason why they called it the Inflation Reduction Act in America, sorry. If you can look at that, that black squiggly line, that is looking at the cost of fossil fuels, so gas, petrol, energy, electricity. And it pretty much matches the cost of living, so the home running costs. And so as the cost of fossil fuels keeps rising, the cost of our cost of living rises. So that's the cost of inflation. If you actually got off fossil fuels and used renewable energies, once you get over kind of the barrier of firstly installing that, so the running cost would actually flatline. So no longer would our cost of living and our inflation be kind of matched to the cost of fossil fuels, which if you think about it, those prices are often beyond our control just by looking at our recent gas prices that are very much tied to the kind of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So as Saul kind of mentioned in that video, the basic premise of electrifying our households is trying to address 6 key areas within our home. And this can also be within a business, but I'll just talk about within a home. So we're looking at electrifying our water heater, our space heater, meaning how we heat our home, our kitchens, our cars, powering that all from rooftop solar, and then using a battery to kind of make the use of solar of energy that we can't generate at night. So our own group in 2515, we kind of decided we wanted to take on this project, but we all kind of met at the pub, and a lot of us are friends, but we weren't really sure if anyone in the community would actually be interested in as we were. So we started out by sending a survey, an online survey out, and we just shared it through our various networks. And we kind of set the target of 500 households. We needed 500 households to register their interest and complete our survey to know if we could even be considered to be kind of a net zero emissions community. And we got that in the first 4 days that we sent it out. We thought it was going to take us months of kind of connecting the communities. Right now we're on about 1,100 responses, and that's about 25% of our community have responded, which is really exciting. And for me, what it shows is the power of the community because there's one thing to have, you know, governments or big kind of energy companies trying to maybe change things. There's another thing for that grassroots mobilization that is really effective. So, and that's what's really exciting about you guys all meeting regularly, is that you all are creating that community, and you all have other networks within your own community that you can utilize to try and bring on board. So we sent out this survey, as I said, and one of the things that we were trying to get understand is where people were already at on the electrification journey. So what sort of things do they already have in their home, and what were some of the barriers that they faced to implement some of the items. And cost was a really big factor, of course, of why people might not have installed, say, solar panels, for instance, or a battery. But another key thing was that a lot of people across all the kind of 6 items that we surveyed just said that one of the top 3 reasons was that they didn't know much about it. So they didn't necessarily know what the most efficient or form of energy would be. And so part of our role as a group is we're trying to raise general awareness and education. So we host events, things like we hosted an EV open day recently, which basically meant we invited anyone in the community who already owned an EV to kind of come, and all the rest of the community could come and like check them out, see what they were like. And it was a really informal way for people to get a feel of what they're like without, you know, someone trying to sell them something. So I guess some of these things in terms of education, I'll just share some of our learnings with you. So for instance, when we're looking at your hot water, which is one of our biggest household energy users, and you know that there are a range of different types that you can use. Some of you will have an electric resistance, a conventional one, or a gas, one that's powered by gas. Some have solar that might be kind of have boosted by various energy sources. But if you had a heat pump water heater, it would use only 25 to 33% of the energy of the gas or electric resistance alternatives. So a really key premise with this whole idea of electrifying our households is not just, you know, implementing renewable energy as the way we power our homes, but it's also trying to reduce our energy consumption overall. So by using the most efficient forms of technology that we have in our homes. So if we look at that in dollar terms, if you look at the kind of the lifetime running cost of your water heater which is roughly about 10 years, if you're on, for instance, a gas hot water heater, over 10 years, you'd be spending around $3,600 running your hot water system. If you had an electric heat pump, which you powered off the grid, that would be more like $1,500. If you had an electric heat pump and you used the solar that you generated on your own roof, over 10 years, your running costs would be more like $400. So a significant saving. It's a similar story if we're looking at the way we heat our homes. So that's in terms of how we heat and cool our homes. And the most efficient way that you could heat and cool your home is using it's called a split system, or some people call it a reverse cycle air conditioner. It's the same thing. The benefit is they both heat and cool, and it uses 1/4 to 1/3 of the energy of standard heat, like home heaters. So again, if you're looking at that in dollar terms, over the lifetime running costs of a gas heater, you'd be looking at close to $5,000 over 10 years. If you had this as a reverse cycle air conditioning, sometimes it's also called an electric heat pump, using the solar off your rooftop, it would actually be more like $1,400 you'd spend over 10 years. So again, a really big saving. When it comes to our cooking, and this sometimes is a more of a touch point for people, because, you know, some of us feel quite emotionally connected to the way we cook our food. And I guess I'd like to think that it's actually gas companies have been very effective at marketing gas as being the better form of cooking fuel. So you can cook better with gas. But there's actually a new campaign that's recently launched by the Global Cook Safe Coalition, and that's a coalition of scientists and health workers and chefs who all are basically pledging to abandon their kind of gas cooktops for induction cooking. And so they have the likes of chefs like Neil Perry changing all his stove tops in all his kind of commercial kitchens over to induction. And you know, if Neil Perry can cook his, you know, flambés and soufflés using an induction cooktop, then I think, you know, you and I can cook our 2-minute noodles or whatever. In terms of dollars spent, a gas stove, you'd spend about $1,000 over 10 years. And again, if we're looking at this bottom one, if you're using an induction cooktop with solar off your roof, that price would more than halve. So still a good saving, probably not as significant as your hot water and your air conditioning. So if you're only looking at doing some of these items, then I would start with the way you heat your water and your home. But probably the biggest impact you could have is looking at your vehicle. So electric vehicles use 1/4 to 1/3 of the energy of the same model of petrol and diesel cars. And that whole kind of campaign years ago about, you know, EVs stealing our weekend has just been kind of completely sideswiped by the launch of cars where they're comparable kind of utes and things to the Toyota Hilux, using the exact same kind of power, but using 1/4 of the energy. And in terms of dollar savings, this is really significant. So over 10 years, you and I would be spending about $15,000 on running the energy to power our standard petrol or diesel car. And if you had an electric car and you charge it off the grid, that number would be more like $8,000 over those 10 years. If you charge your car with solar on your rooftop, that number comes down to as low as $800. So it's a significant saving. Of course, electric vehicles is the most cost prohibitive item. That's the most expensive item you could be doing, but it's also, if anyone's in a position to be considering electric vehicles, it's where you could have the biggest impact in terms of reducing your carbon emissions, but also reducing your running costs over the lifetime of the vehicle. Of course, it's not just about vehicles. This is me and my 3 little kids, and we get around a lot on our electric cargo bike. I take them to school on it, and it's a really great way to get around sort of shorter distances. That means, you know, we don't need a second car because we can get most of our distances using this. If you put all those items together, the average household would save between $3,000 and $5,000 every single year. And what is, like, you know, really exciting about this is that once you can kind of pay off the initial upfront costs of those items, you keep on saving for the lifetime of that technology. And most of us will be replacing these technologies, you know, every sort of 10 years or so. And so there's a real opportunity for us to make independent decisions that have a really big impact. So if every single person who, you know, when they came to wanting to replace one of these items in their home, chose the most energy efficient option, they'll be making a significant impact. What we want to do is try and fast track this, so more people kind of implement these items at a faster rate. Of course, you know, when it comes to the barrier of paying for this upfront, that's, you know, a significant one for a lot of us. And this is where we think governments have a real responsibility to be supporting communities and households, to be paying and subsidising for a lot of these changes. And if you think that the government can't afford to support households to implement some of these, then, you know, I would just like to point out the fact that we, the federal government funds, you know, fossil fuel industry with subsidies to the tune of about $11 or $12 billion every single year.
At least, yeah.
Definitely a lot of money there. It's just the choices that can be made. So in terms of overcoming the barriers, upfront cost is one of them. Some of the other barriers to implementing some of these electrification items might be the fact that you might be a renter, you might be a strata property such as an apartment or a townhouse. Maybe you have a lot of shade or limited capacity on your rooftop. And this is where we're looking also to community-wide solutions. So in our area, this is a picture about where we've got the beautiful privilege of having this gorgeous escarpment at the back of where we live, that runs kind of along the back of our coastline. However, the downside of it means that from about 2 p.m. in the afternoon, a lot of the houses are covered in shade. So many households who have wanted to get solar, the solar providers have said to them, don't bother because you won't get enough sunshine. However, if you look at all our households in the area, and there was a study done by University of New South Wales and the Australian Photovoltaics Institute, and they found that in our area, 2515, if 80% of the homes had a decent solar array, it would power more than 100% of the homes. So there's definitely enough rooftop capacity as in communities all over Australia. And one thing that we're advocating for is less about the individual household being responsible for their own energy, but a lot more community creation of energy infrastructure that can be shared, so we can address some of these issues like people who are renting or people who are in strata or too much shade, for instance. And in terms of what I said before about the cost being a barrier, the exciting thing about that is that's a really simple barrier to overcome in a lot of ways, because the technology is now available. We just need better financing models, and that can be achieved through subsidies and incentives, also changing some of our way we finance items, maybe through rate-based financing models, for instance. These are bigger kind of issues, but they're ones that are part of the whole electrification journey. So working as a community is really important to get a lot of these community-wide objectives, and this is what we're doing as a group down in 2515. Is not only are we trying to encourage individual households to, on their own accord, to implement some of these items, we're also looking at ways to assist the community-wide implementation. So that's things like looking into community solar arrays, so talking to our local council to get them to use the surf club or the library, for instance, to create infrastructure that could generate community energy surfaces. We're looking into a community battery, like trying to apply for funding to potentially look at getting one of them. They're very expensive, so who knows with that. We're also looking at things like whether we start an energy co-op so we can negotiate as a collective for cheaper energy. Things like bulk purchasing of appliances. So just north of us in the Sutherland Shire, a group organised a big bulk purchase of solar panels and got a really, much cheaper rate for, the community than if they all went about it individually. The same could be said for all of those technological appliances. And we're also lobbying, basically. We're seeking a lot of support from our council, but also state and federal MPs to assist with things like approvals for if we want more EV fast chargers, for instance. So I guess I'll finish up soon, and maybe if you wanted to ask me questions, you're welcome to. But I guess if you were to ask me, well, what could you do right now for any of these? And the first thing I'd say is get started. If you can afford any of the items up front that I've listed, the costs will pay themselves back over time. It's just, it can be a long-term game, but there are also already some rebates available that are really useful that some people don't know are available. For instance, there's a good heat pump rebate that's available from the New South Wales government. So I would go to energy.gov.au because it lists all the various rebates available. If you can't or you don't want to have solar panel on your roof, then you could definitely be buying 100% green power. And I would be looking for providers that don't get any of their energy from fossil fuels. So all those big energy retailers like AGL and Origin and Energy Australia, they're still the biggest owners of the big coal-fired power stations. And so I wouldn't personally be supporting them. There are plenty of smaller groups that actually are funding genuine large-scale renewable energy projects. So that could be Diamond Energy, Energy Locals, Amber. I'm not advocating for any of them in particular, but these are some of the ones that are available. You could look into seeing if you could get some sort of solar farm or garden up, and there are organisations that assist with that. And so some groups are doing things like crowdfunding a larger solar array that people could buy shares into and then get the kind of dividends, I guess, back from that, and that will help offset their power bills. You generally need to ideally work together as a group to achieve some of those community-wide goals that I mentioned, and in terms such as lobbying your MPs. So the sorts of things that we're asking for from our council and also state and federal government are these. We're calling for things like a range of incentives to fast-track household electrification, so things like subsidies. In the ACT, they have a decent subsidy for household batteries, because at the moment they are really expensive and the cost for them haven't come down like they have for solar, but we do need some way to kickstart that process. We need the federal government to be implementing fuel efficiency standards, which will get more and cheaper electric vehicles into our country, because at the moment Australia is a bit of a dumping ground for the more polluting cars because we don't have strict fuel efficiency standards here. Governments can be assisting in providing community solar and battery initiatives. Governments can also be providing concessional finance to all homes, especially for renters. So we need ways that kind of support those that are least able to implement some of these off the bat. So low income earners or renters, for instance. Another way that renters will be assisted is if there's minimum efficiency standards for all rental properties. So landlords have some sort of carrot and stick approach to making sure that its renters aren't the ones that have to pay for the most expensive energy costs because they don't have any control over what is in their home, for instance. So I realize I've talked a lot, and there's probably, I'm not even sure what time it is, if I've spoken too long or too short, but that's all I was planning on sharing with you today. So thank you for that. I might stop the share now so you can see our faces again if you'd like. But yeah, I hope that was okay and it was interesting. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them for you.
Kristen, we really enjoyed that, and it was really timely that you came and gave us a talk, because we've been talking a lot about those issues that you've been raised. We've been reading The Big Shift. We've been talking about it a lot, but having you come along and reiterating it and seeing it on the ground, that's really important to us, and it gives us a lot of encouragement. So thank you very much for that. So we're going to open up to questions. I think, David, have you got a question?
I do, yeah. Thank you, Kristen, so much, because so much of that resonates with me and resonates with Electrifying Bradfield. It's fantastic. And I congratulate you and wish you all the very best.
Thank you, much appreciated.
What's really interesting is that a number of things you've said actually fit with what we're trying to do as well.
Great.
I'm really interested in your social survey, which is one of the projects for us for next year. Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask you about how did you communicate that survey possibility to the residents across your 6 suburbs? And what sort of relationship do you have with councils, and how do they support you or not support you in that? Okay,
thanks, David. So in terms of the survey, we created the survey as an online survey because we didn't really have any budget to be printing paper surveys. Also, the benefit of that is it's something that can be shared easily. So I don't know how sort of tech savvy your kind of constituents in the area are, but I feel like most people, it's a very simple survey. I feel like most people are able to do it. And I'm happy to share the survey that we created with you if you'd like to use it and adjust it.
That would be really
for
good.
your purposes.
Yep. Thank you.
We started by all of us, and like you are in some various circles within our own community. So we started it by just sharing it with, you know, the local school the local school group that I'm in, and everyone did that with about, you know, probably 6 different networks that they're in. There's local groups that we thought that had natural synergies. We shared with, like, maybe that, I don't know in your area, but there's like a Facebook group they call themselves Sustainable Illawarra here. So we shared it on some of those kind of platforms. We asked some businesses who have mailing lists to include it in their kind of mailing lists. So it was very much like a community grassroots thing. And it became, I guess, word of mouth. We eventually ended up printing off a whole bunch of just small flyers, and we organised a whole lot of volunteers to do a letterbox drop. So we reached a whole new set of people, and that had like a QR code and a URL of the survey then. So that reached a whole lot of other people that we weren't reaching through those former ways I said. And we did print off some posters. So we put up some posters around at the local shops and things. So it was sort of word of mouth in the end, but yeah, a lot of seeding, I guess, by each of us. So we created a volunteer group, like all you are in here. And as I said, each of you would have some various networks you could share it with, and then you ask them to share it on. And
can you tell me how many responses you got?
Yes, so we're at 1,200 responses now, and this has been running for maybe 6 months, I guess.
Right.
So it can take a little while in some way, and that's 1,200 responses. They're not necessarily all going to be doing all the things that you want, but it's at least 1,200 people who are somewhat interested in it to at least find out more, and we see it at the very least as an education opportunity to those 1,200 people. So now we have like a mailing list, an email list of those 1,200 people, and we often email them with, different information. And in terms of the second part of your question, connecting with council, we see them as both a potential support and a potential hindrance. So we are trying to, our council, like most councils these days, do have their own emissions reduction targets. And so we're trying to frame our campaign as helping the council reach their targets. So we're trying to frame it like, we can help you if you help us.
Right.
So we're not yet at the stage where we know if they're going to help us yet with some of those bigger ideas that we have. For instance, putting, solar panels on the surf club and then letting us be able to use some of that energy for the community. But for us, there's a lot of incentive for them to do it because it meets their targets and it's meeting the community's needs.
I agree with you about how you're seeing them. All I'd say is that we have been able to develop a reasonably good relationship with Ku-ring-gai, but they are not prepared to actively engage in organising anything themselves, but they are prepared to support us. And as long as we're non-political, non-partisan, political.
Yes.
So, yeah, that's a useful way to proceed. The last thing I wanted to say to you is that I do have 3 solutions for people living in strata and apartments.
Love to hear them.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I would love to give them to you. Maybe Janine can give you my email or whatever, and we can be in contact. But I actually have 3 case studies of 3 different possible solutions to people in strata and actual case studies of how that's happened.
Okay. I'd love to read it. Thank you.
Thank you.
That was great. That was very interesting and very fulsome, that discussion, and really makes us think a lot. What about anybody else? Anybody else want to ask something to Kristen? Wally, did you want to say anything? Because we've got Wal Knowles here, and Wal Knowles gave a talk last month about just putting the simple thing about putting solar on his roof. But one of the big things that came out of that was the challenges of batteries. Sue and Bill, who are with us also tonight, found it a real challenge, the home battery, you know, and one of the things we have to do next year is to do some talk on battery. Can you want to step in and just say anything about that, Kristen?
What's the actual challenge? Is it the challenge of installing it, or is the challenge of the cost, or what's the challenge?
The challenge was, what was it, Bill?
I might have raised the battery.
Here, I can go and ask him, Janine.
Okay, you go and ask him, but we'll hand it over to Wal for the moment. Yes, Wal.
Yeah.
Right. When I spoke about having new solar put in after the old ones had 12 years service, anybody I spoke to never wanted me to put battery in. They just were more interested in selling you the solar panels and getting the government rebate. I think with batteries, the problem I had was the size of them, and to get one that would probably suit two people in my situation, it would be around about 10,000. Whereas you can pick them up for 3,000, but they probably wouldn't last you very long. Would that be correct?
Yeah, we're looking at batteries that for most average households would be more like $13,000 to $15,000. So obviously that's a large amount of money. And as I was saying, you know, unlike solar technology, where because there's been a huge uptake of it, the economics of it have become more favorable. Batteries, we're a long way behind that. It's annoyingly, it's sort of the chicken and the egg situation, right? Like we need more people to be buying batteries to bring down the cost of batteries for everybody. And that's one of the reasons why we're asking the government to the state government to subsidise batteries to try and get the cost parity down. But yeah, they're definitely expensive, unfortunately. But you know, if you're have the means to do it, then that's fantastic. But understand that that's a really, you know, that's one of the big ticket items. That and an EV are the two, you know, big ticket items. Solar is expensive at front, but it's a bit of a no-brainer in the sense that you can really be making your money back pretty quickly. Batteries, it's a longer game.
Right. Had you thought of putting, say, a battery for a group of houses, say 5, 10 houses?
Yeah, so one of the things we're also trying to do is we've been starting negotiations with our local distributor, which is Energy Endeavour down here. I don't know if you're Ausgrid or whoever you're with up there, but they are interested in potentially doing, they're calling them like pole mounted batteries. So it's sort of, you know, all the telegraph poles, they could basically have a battery on top of it and help support groups of houses rather than individuals, which, you know, there's a lot of sense in that, whether they would have kind of financial imperative to do that, but they're interested in the technology of that. So, you know, we're trying to convince them to maybe experiment with that with us. And the other one is like a big community battery, which can power a lot of people, but they're very expensive, and they kind of, you have to be granted one of them by the federal government, because they can be anywhere from like $2 to $5 million. But if you got one of them, you'd be supporting most of your community. So that's one option, is trying to apply for funding for that. I would imagine though that the federal government wouldn't be handing a free battery out to Bradfield residents. But you can always ask, I guess.
Good. Thanks.
Bill, you're there. Did you want to add anything to what we've just discussed about the batteries? Unmute. We can't hear. Not coming through.
There was something wrong with our mic.
Okay, we can hear you now. Okay, we're still having trouble with the sound.
Yeah. Yeah, sorry.
Okay, go Bill. We can't hear.
No,
You need to get closer, Bill. You need to get closer and speak louder.
We can't hear.
They may be muted.
No, they're not.
Okay.
Oh, we're not muted.
Well, I don't know. I think it's third house.
You've just muted again.
No, they're not muted.
No, they're not muted.
Do you want to send your message in via the chat box? All right. We're not having any luck with you, Bill.
How's that?
That's
you
much
hear
better.
us now?
Yoo-hoo.
No.
We can't hear you.
You were good. Speak. No, you're muted. Hang on.
They're gone again.
I'll unmute him. I'll unmute him.
There, try now.
It's not responding to me clicking
No.
on mute.
He can't hear you.
No, he's muted.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll just have to put that battery
Right.
one away, which was an issue brought up by Bill and Sue at the last meeting after listening to Wal.
Try
who-
one more time, Bill. Try one more time. Go. No.
Well, Janine, one of the things we want to look at is for a webinar early next year on batteries.
Yes,
Quick.
we can slightly hear you.
Just a sec.
Yeah, you're good. Go. Talk.
Oh, okay. You can hear me now.
Yes.
Okay. So, look, as Kristen said, there's just the cost thing. The pricing is just not there yet, but the technology is improving. It's not improving at a sort of a massive step rate, but it's improving steadily. So somewhere a bit further down the track, it's highly likely that we're going to find solutions. But if you want to do sort of pole mounted small community batteries, even 4 or 5 houses, that means you're going to need probably 50, 60 kilowatts up on the pole. And that would be probably challenging with the technologies we have available at the moment. But that's going to get better. The IEEE did an article recently in Spectrum on energy density, which is a key issue in terms of the viability of battery technologies. And I'll see if I can send that through to Janine. It's not specifically about domestic storage, and it's more about, talks about transportation utilisation, but it does talk about what's actually happening with some, with the development of battery technologies. And that basically comes back to saying, yes, it's going to get better, but it's probably going to take a while.
Yeah, and that's the power of governments, is to be able to, intervene to supercharge these natural market processes.
University of Newcastle is doing a lot of work on batteries, and that one of the things that they're sort of pioneering is batteries basically made on emulsified water as supercapacitors. So it's interesting to go and have a look at what they're doing up there.
Okay. All right, well, any other questions to ask Kristen? I think you've really given us a lot of inspiration, Kristen, and we've got a bit of a challenge, and we'd love to work with you and keep in contact with you, because really that's the power not only of our local community, but collaborating across Sydney and hearing your work. And we were very interested in when we saw what you were doing. So we're very delighted that you came tonight and gave that very, step-by-step, simple but incredibly powerful. And that connectivity, really what you're saying, is with the community, which is so important. So that's really delightful. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, let's give Kristen a lovely Okay, so we're just going to finish, but before we finish, I'm going to hand it over to David, because one of the things that you might like to hear is we just had a steering committee where David met with a small group. And if you would like to come to the steering meeting, we're having it on next Monday at the Gordon Library at 10 o'clock. So over to you, David, to report on the steering committee meeting, Electrifying Bradfield.
Okay, well, some of you probably know that I've mentioned a little bit of this before, that Rod and I and others have been a group of net zero champions working with Ku-ring-gai Council net zero team. And one of my suggestions earlier on was that we should have a meeting in which all of the groups who are working on positive climate action in the Northern Beaches areas brought together to sit around the table and talk about who they are, what they're trying to do, what sort of strategies they've employed already, what sort of experiences they've had, how can we learn from one another, and where do we want to go. And we had that meeting on the 30th of November, and it was an incredible meeting. It was really, really good. At the meeting, it was established fairly clearly, as I've said to Kristen, that one of the people became quite effusive about asking council to sponsor a day, as she had experienced herself with a council in the Western District or Western suburbs of Sydney, some sort of green energy, sustainability, whatever you want to call it, event day. But it was very clear, reading between the lines, as I said to Kristen, that while the council was very happy to support us with giving us a venue and some in-kind support, they weren't certainly going to do anything about organising it. So at that meeting, a group of at least half a dozen of us have decided to go ahead, and we're going to have a sort of initial meeting to sort of just do a bit of talking about what that might look like. Once that's been done, then we're going to be spreading that more widely and inviting as many people as possible who want to join us to come in and work on some sort of full day event somewhere in the Bradfield Council areas, maybe more than one event in 2023. So that's a really exciting development, I think, that is going to build up in the next few months. The other thing I wanted to announce to you is that I got an email from Andy, who runs the Good Car Company in Tasmania, and basically imports second-hand Nissan Leaf electric vehicles into the country. He has just been given the contract from the federal government. He used to import up to 3,000. They're now going to import 20 to 30,000 cars a year beginning next year. And as a December offer to anybody who wants to buy a second-hand Nissan Leaf, somewhere around about 15 grand probably, they are offering you $500 EV charging card, which is the equivalent in Nissan Leaf to about 4,000 kilometres. And they're also $500 donation to Seed, which is an amazing green energy through planting organisation. So if you're interested in buying an electric vehicle, people, then here's a chance to do it through Good Car Company. And if you go online, you will find all the details there where you can register if you've got an interest. Okay, that's my piece.
Can't hear you, Janine. I don't know why. You're not
They
muted.
couldn't hear me because I was muted because I had a cough and I had to turn myself off a minute ago.
Oh, right.
Look, thank you, David. That was a great report. And as I said, we're having our meeting next Monday. And I think the steering committee is doing a fantastic job. So I'd like to personally thank David for chairing that and taking the lead on that, because that's been an enormous amount of work that David's been doing, and negotiating and meeting, and particularly the excitement of really forming alliances with different but similar people who really want to make an impact in various ways, and we can all learn from each other. So thank you so much, David, for that.
Thank you.
And also, I'm going to hand it over to Wayne in a minute, but before I do, this is our last webinar for 2030, and I'd just like to say thank you so much to everyone who has been coming along to our webinars, and I do hope that you've been enjoying them. By doing our webinars, we are keeping the momentum going, and even though it's a small group, we record them where we can tell people. For example, we just put in I'm not sure whether it was a grant, but some information to the council, and we could record and tell the council that we had systematically run so many of these webinars, and that is an impressive achievement. But to do that, Wayne, thank you, Wayne, because Wayne is the one who hosts this webinar, who has the practice rehearsal, who guides it. So thank you so much, Wayne, for that. And in the background, there's John Robins. John Robins is not here tonight, but I would like to publicly thank him, because he's the one who works with me to get the information out, to put the, do all that thing we have to press the button to record it. And sometimes it doesn't work. And thank you for the patience of people who understand that we are all volunteers and we are doing this completely on our own. And I think what we've done and achieved is just remarkable. And I know next year is going to be even a bigger year, because we've been spending a lot of time working on the foundations that will then take off next year. So, and I do thank you for coming and joining us, because if you don't come, we don't have the webinar. So thank you everyone tonight for joining us, and I do wish you a safe and Merry Christmas. And now I hand over to Wayne.
Yes, okay, all right. We had loosely woven with putting on our concerts, and some of you have already been to them, and there's 2 more opportunities at Avalon on this Sunday, but then the following Saturday, the 17th of December, here at Humm Hall. If you haven't been to Humm Hall yet, there's 2 performances, one at 1 o'clock, one at 5 o'clock. You'll enjoy it. It's a different sort of Christmas concert. Probably it's not your average carol singing. You're not going to get Good King Wenceslas. You'll get some really beautiful things. I was in the Renaissance Players early music group at Sydney University for 10 years in the 70s, and Winsome Evans put on some Christmas concerts as well as early music concerts, and she did some beautiful Christmas arrangements, and we've adapted some of those, and there's going to be 6 of those in this concert. I'm going to play you just one of the songs that we are doing in this concert. This is not one of the beautiful ones. This is a fun one, right? We'll finish with you to look at. But this is one of the things that you will get if you do come to our concert. You'll get to see this live. Marilyn Monroe. Do you remember Marilyn Monroe?
No. Here I am, darling.
I've been an awful good girl, said the baby. the chimney tonight. Think of all the fun I've missed. I think of all the fellas that I haven't kissed. Next year I could be just as good if you check off my Christmas list. Santa honey, I want a yacht and really that's all alone. I'll wait up for you, dear Santa baby. Hurry down the chimney tonight. Santa honey, there's one thing that I really do need. The deed to a platinum mine. Santa baby, hurry down the chimney tonight. Santa cutie, fill my stocking with a duplex and checks. Sign your X on the line, Santa baby. Hurry down the chimney tonight. Oh, come and trim my Christmas tree. Oh, with some decorations for Tiffany. Oh, Santa, I really do believe in you. Let's see if you believe in me too. Ba-boop-be-doo. Santa baby, forgot to mention one little thing. I'll ring, and I don't mean on the phone. Santa baby, hurry down the chimney tonight. Hurry down the chimney tonight. Hurry tonight.
Yes, come and join the Loosely Woven. You'll be able to see it this weekend and next weekend. Thanks, everyone. Bye,
Bye.
everyone. Merry Christmas and a happy electrifying New
Bye.
Year.
Ron, speak up and say goodbye.
Bye, Ron.
See you. Thanks.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.